Today on General Hospital, the part of Dr. Severence Maclaughlin will be played by Angela Radcliffe. I've always wanted to say something like that. So as you can tell, I'm not Dr. Severence Maclaughlin. Unfortunately, he was in a car accident on Friday. He's fine. But let me tell you how my day went yesterday. At 1 o'clock, I got a phone call from Seven. He said, Ange, I'm doing much better, but the doctor wouldn't clear me to fly. Do you mind just heading over to Spark tonight so you can give my panel in the morning? And I said, of course. I mean, Severance and I have spent most of this year trying to connect the patient and the clinician experience with some of the advances in AI. And this is one of the most exciting places we can apply AI. And then on my layover, I got a message that one of our panelists was going to be held up in Mexico because of flight issues. And I thought, the universe is not smiling on my panel. What's going to happen here? So imagine my delight when I walked into my room at 1 a.m. to see the reel from yesterday, and an executive from GE said, I'm most looking forward to the panel on AI tomorrow. No pressure. I think it's okay, though, because while the universe has conspired against us a bit, I have probably two of the most uniquely credentialed and provocative panelists to share with you today. So I'm going to invite up our first speaker, Dr. Manny Fombu. He is an award-winning and best-selling author, physician, keynote and speaker, investor and entrepreneur, and medical futurist with over 10 years of combined experience in clinical medicine, drug development, digital medicine, research, pragmatic trials, product lifecycle, management strategy, and biopharmaceutical experience, as well as private equity. His current focus is on how digital technologies can be leveraged to better measure healthcare-related products' real-world effectiveness. In addition to his book, The Future of Healthcare, Human-Machine Partnering for Better Outcomes, Dr. Fombu has authored multiple research papers and abstracts in renowned peer-review journals. He's also an award-winning futurist, winner of the prestigious New York City Health Business Leader's Boldest Digital Health Influencer Award, and a champion and advocate for value-based healthcare. Dr. Fombu did his clinical training at Emory-Crawford. He holds MBAs from both Cornell University's Johnson School of Business and Queen's University's Smith School of Business, and has earned his certification in artificial intelligence implications for business strategy from MIT's Sloan School of Management. I'm very excited to welcome to the stage Dr. Manny Fombu. Our second panelist, Richie Etwaru, believes the most important ingredient for change is courage. Courage not mistaken with risk, but consistent with the bravery required to embark on something never attempted. Richie has spanned unlikely disciplines in multiple continents over 2 decades. He's had the honor to operate in academia, entrepreneurship, government advisory, Fortune 500 companies. He's been quoted in NPR, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the Financial Times, Washington Post, Forbes, VentureBeat. Richie, is there anything you haven't been quoted in? And he has appeared on dozens of television stations and media outlets globally. As founder and CEO of Humanity.co, Richie is known for pursuing the 31st human right. Everyone has the right to legal ownership of their inherent human data as property. He is driven to reshape the world by creating a new data economy where inherent human data is legally human property. Please welcome my friend Richie Etwaru. Good to see you, my friend. All right, gentlemen. So, the evolution of big data, the digital awakening has made AI the buzzword on everyone's lips.
By the way, we did not have the questions, so this is pretty exciting.
That's how I roll. It's on the tip of everyone's tongue, but how much of AI is hype versus reality? So how much has the promise of AI personas like Watson, Amelia, Holmes, and Einstein, how much is hype and how much is reality? And tell us what you think AI is and what it is not.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much hype and reality as it is scale. So most of the stories that we hear about algorithms that are doing interesting things, they exist. There's one of them, or there's 2 of them, or if you're lucky, there's 3. I think the issue is that they haven't really scaled to other businesses or other industries or many use cases. And that's an artifact of fear. I think it's an artifact of understanding how to actually implicate AI. And last but not least, it's an artifact of not understanding the category itself. And by that I mean, most of us are comfortable buying software. Like everybody's bought software. Most of us are comfortable buying data. Everybody's bought data. Most of us are comfortable buying service. Nobody was comfortable with buying infrastructure, right? That was a bad deal, and it still is a bad deal. AI is actually data, software, and services together. And it's important for executives in boardrooms to understand that AI is not just something you buy, it's something you cultivate. And I think that's where a lot of the disappointment falls, because like, oh, look, this is happening, with Watson over here. They're doing this cool thing with a flux capacitor, right, somewhere. Nobody laughed at that, anybody? Nobody got flux capacitor, right? So IBM's got a flux capacitor somewhere, right? Take that and drop it into my business, right? It's just not that simple. And we've all gotten a little too comfortable with the fact that you could install something and it could just work, right? The AI is not going to be apt, right? You're not going to download an algorithm and it's going to work exactly the way it works somewhere else. And I think that's what's driving the divide. That's where the disappointment gap is, at least from my vantage point.
I mean, Manny, I've read your book. You're very aspirational about AI. What's your take?
Well, what's my take? I'm not a big fan of sci-fi movies, kind of. So I've never been like crazy about crazy AI. To me, when I look at AI, I see the value of prediction, right? That's basically what it is. It comes down to this idea of prediction. And as a physician or as any human being, you make decisions based on past information, right? That's just the basic way we function and how we make decisions. The challenge I find being in healthcare, I mean, in medical practice or in pharma, I've been in couple of pharma companies, from Novartis to Johnson & Johnson, is in the room, is everyone wants to talk about AI, right? So everyone is an expert in AI all of a sudden, right? So if you have a solution to any problem, the first thing is, do you have an AI piece into it, right? That's the idea. Because everyone spends time, and you read about this stories about like, IBM Watson or AlphaGo kind of models, and everyone expects this AI brain to show up and solve your problems for you, right? That's not how it works, right? Before AlphaGo, if you like DeepMind and AlphaGo, kind of like the whole concept behind it is there's a whole period where they actually trained the algorithms over time before the competition, right? If you look at even the publications on IBM Watson, there was a whole period where there was a whole training behind the things before it happened. What happens is everyone sees the final product and everyone expects this AI algorithm to come in and solve problems. And so no one has that long-term vision. And so I think that's the biggest challenge. And another problem is the mindsets within corporations. I don't know if whether you're in the pharma side or in GE. I met a couple of GE folks yesterday, so GE in the room, or Boeing, or whatever company you're in. You need to have a long-term vision of what you're talking about, right? So and that comes a long way how you lay out the foundation of this. So it's not the thing of like, hey, I need AI solution in 6 months, right? If you are doing clinical trials, in the research piece of it, that takes about 10 years to get a product in the market. Why not start collecting data for those 10 years and actually train your algorithm for 10 years? Why wait till you have a product in the market, then you look for the magical algorithm to solve your problems, right? So I think it's a mindset problem. If you look at Netflix, for example, when Netflix first started, you could write a DVD and then mail it back in, right? Slowly. Over time, Netflix got to understand you and know what you like. Now Netflix creates content for you, right? And they could do that better over time. It didn't happen overnight, but it gets better over time. So I think it's a mindset that we need to educate people about.
I think when we solve the business problems that at least we try to solve with AI, and it comes down to understanding that it's an input-output issue. At the fundamental level, data is the input, intelligence is the output. And I think we forget this. I'll tell you guys a quick story. My first algorithm that I wrote could predict if someone is cheating on their spouse. And you're like, wow, that's a really awesome algorithm, right? Yeah. Now, why would I write that? That's a whole different talk.
I've met your wife, and she's lovely.
Yeah, this was prior to me getting married. And you focus so much on the output. But as an executive, you have to think about the input. Here's how, it was actually a simple algorithm. It was about 37 lines of code. And here's why. I had 1-800-Flower transactions data. 1-800-Flowers, I had all the transaction data, and I had EasyPass data. It's that simple. if you buy 2 sets of flowers on Valentine's Day, one is not going to the address that the one on Mother's Day went to, and your Easy Pass puts you in the zip code during the week where the other flower went to, it's done. So I tell that story really simply to understand that you were impressed by the algorithm, right? You're like, wow, that's a great artificial intelligence capability. But you weren't focusing on the input. If you have the right data set, 37 lines of code could do magic for a marriage. That's got to be tweetable. Right. Right? So I think it's really important as executives to hone in on, and I know it sounds really simple and really cliche, it's an input-output issue. And if you have the right input, the algorithms are actually not the rock stars.
I think we need to add another counseling booth outside next to the couples counseling. Okay, but let's talk about this then. The unspoken issue in AI is data. And it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, right? I think generally our assessment is that about 95% of our customers do not have a good control of their data lifecycle management. And I think a lot of them struggle with, let's just put it all into data lakes and then we'll figure out what to do with it. And then we have a few customers who think, let's start with the outcome and then let's go find the data that we need to build the algorithm against to serve that outcome. Which direction do you think it needs to go? And what do we need to do to help people learn to crawl in the data space and then walk and then run as we scale to AI? Manny?
Sure. I think the first thing is to actually have data scientists in the room when you're actually trying to figure this data thing out, right? We spend a lot of money cleaning data, right? So we have tons of data, right? So we look at healthcare, and you said you've been doing clinical trials for the last 100 years, and you have all this data. Yes, we do. So what do? We hire experts, and we say, hey, let's clean the data. So then while they clean the data, we are proactively designing clinical studies the same way we did it previously, right? And so it's like a crazy mindset that you're cleaning and then doing the same thing all over again. So I think it comes back to this idea of what is the right structure in place, right? If you have the right experts, I know Capgemini, for example, you have like Severence. I've had discussions with the team there, and you have great experts, and I think having the more holistic view of an industry and then say, how do we lay the right foundation in place while we clean the previous data? How do we proactively collect the right data sets? Right? And I like using the phrase, it's not about the amount of data you have, it's about smart data, right? What is relevant? You don't need to have 10 billion data points to make a decision, right? You can need 31 data points like Richie mentioned here, right, to figure out, but what is the right data sets that you need?
Yeah. I think, look, we can talk a little bit more about data and about where it comes from and whether you should have it or not. But most of the use cases that at least I've been involved in the last 10 years, it doesn't start with a business case. That's an AI misbehaving. Yeah. That's a conversational AI misbehaving. You shouldn't talk about the AI. By the way, you just got an experience of the future. Right? So thank you for breaking my train of thought. But the business case is where most of the projects are breaking down. And I think there's AI for a business process, which is low input, low output. There is AI for a business model. And then there's AI for a business ecosystem. And the business process stuff, I think we all understand and we get it pretty well. The business model is where it gets fascinating. So for example, if you think about autonomous algorithms, most people are very excited about autonomous algorithms. We're actually working with one car manufacturer who were managing the data privacy rights of the data from the car in exchange for a discount in the lease of the car to train their autonomous algorithms, right? But that's still a business process. It's not a business model. The business model is how do you ensure a car when the car is being driven by an algorithm? And what's the actuarial against the algorithms that are coming from Tesla versus Mercedes-Benz? Right? You know I'm a terrible driver, so you understand the actuarials against me. But what's the actuarial when you don't have human insight? That's a business model. And then the business ecosystem is can I drive a Tesla with a Mercedes-Benz algorithm? right? Because their data is better and they have a better algorithm that trained it. So most of the activities that are going on is actually going in the opposite direction of what it should be. We're starting with the data first. And look, I've got 1-800-Flowers transactions and I've got EasyPass data. So as a 24-year-old, what else would you do with that? As a responsible, or any responsible 24-year-old, this was a long time ago. But to start from the business case and work yourself back is where I really think the value is. And I found this it's really simple to get board of directors and executive committees to kind of think about the business process, the business model, and the business ecosystem. And that to me is the crawl, run, walk, crawl, walk, and then run. Yeah, my skills are not good in those types of things. From the data lake perspective and just kind of dropping it all in, the other thing, which is how Seven I started working together, is that data is actually something that depreciates faster than any other asset that you have. The only thing that depreciates faster than data is food. As soon as you have data in its fixed state, the value starts to deteriorate. And so I think we have built businesses for a very long period of time thinking about stocks of knowledge, right? And I have this thing so I can sweat it, right? Data is not an asset that you can sweat, because as soon as you start sweating the asset, you're sweating it in its fixed state. Data has to be in flow. And as you move away from a business process to a business model or a business ecosystem, you'll find that what you don't need is a lake. And I'm going to be super simplified and cheeky here. What you need is a stream. You need a data stream, not a data lake. A data lake is just water sitting, rotting.
A stagnant pool.
Right. What you need is a stream. And I don't know that metaphor goes really well, but I hope that it translates.
No, which is actually very common in healthcare, right? If you go to hospital systems and payers, everyone has all this data. So they go, oh, we heard data is the new oil. So everyone believes they have all this data back there, but there's no value in that, right? And so what we're trying to do now is actually make data actionable. Does anyone in here have the Apple Watch, for example? You got the Apple Watch. You see the prediction models on Apple Watch. I worked on an original study on that, right? So, and I like those efforts. So if you look at the idea of like the Apple Watch being able to predict atrial fibrillation, right, or being able to predict stroke, that is the beginning of it. We are doing work on being able to predict Alzheimer's from voice technology, for example. Which sounds crazy and scary, but that work is happening. There are companies that are being funded right now looking at voice for heart failure, voice for dementia as an extra biomarker. If you ever call your insurance company, for example, and you say, like when you call, they tell you, hey, this voice should be recorded for customer experience purposes. United Healthcare insurance company is taking all those phone calls for the last 15 years that you've called, and they look at your medical record and look at exactly what illnesses you had over time and what your voice looked like. So they have a baseline voice things, and they're looking over time, which means in the future, if you call your insurance company on the phone to get a quote for insurance, they could actually predict your risk for disease based on your voice, right? And so these are things that are happening in real life. And so based on who owns that data set, there are different uses of it, right? So I could use it to say, for example, if you have a risk for stroke, to say, hey, I have this watch that could, tell me before I have a stroke or tell me before I have atrial fibrillation, and I could take my drugs or whatever I take from it, which if you're a pharma company and you have a drug to sell, then that's the right patient you want, right? So people talk about false positive, but for you as a business person, I don't care about false positives. The false positives are great for me because I get to see more patients, right? And more people get on my therapy. It's completely different. Insurance companies having the same data set is completely different, right? Because the insurance company predicting things for you is not that great. Richie mentioned the car example, for example, giving you data to your car. I mean, if Tesla wants to use that data to make your driving experience much better for you, is one thing. Your insurance company using it to say, hey, you're a bad driver, to then penalize you is a completely different thing. Yeah. Same as the insurance company side of it, right? So everyone has a different interest and what happens around us. But yet, if you look at Black Friday, people are in line jumping over each other, killing each other to go buy Apple Alexa boxes and to talk to Alexa, right? But those are the data sets that are coming about, and I'm sure you probably we'll get to the next point of data ownership debates, and so Richie entices us to that.
You know Richie well. So you both brought up some semi-sexy use cases, right? But in reality, where do you think the maturity is? I mean, healthcare traditionally lags behind other industries an investment in these things. And we also have an issue in healthcare of pilotitis, right? Somebody jokingly said we should have an ICD-10 code for pilotitis, and it's true. So a recent study came out and said that if you invest significantly in AI technology, you could see about a 17% ROI. It's pretty significant. But if you dabble in science experiments around AI, you will find a 5 to 7% decrease in your ROI overall. So where do you see maturity, and where do you think that line is to achieving true ROI?
Yeah. So, business cases are beautiful Excel spreadsheets. They really are. I think it was someone this morning in the 7 a.m. session said if we took all the business cases and we did them, we'd be the biggest, most profitable company in the world with the most attractive economics you can imagine. I think that the understanding is where you are on the maturity curve. There's a price that you have to pay to have the right to win. And I think people are misrepresenting learning with failure. Most of the companies that excelled at cloud or excelled at mobile, the first experiments failed miserably, right? There was pilotitis in cloud, there was pilotitis in mobile, and there were failures and there were losses there. I think AI has a little bit more of that because it's a little bit more complex. As my opening remarks, it's data, it's technology, and it's services. It's not something that you buy, it's something that you cultivate, right? Which is very different. It's like growing a bonsai tree. And so that's probably tweetable. So I think, there's gonna be failures, but there's gonna be learnings, and it's the price that you pay. I think I used to run an innovation portfolio at UBS, and I was notorious for saying that 24 of 25 projects are gonna fail. You have to condition the executive committee for failure, right? And so whenever I had a project that failed, I was like, all right, guys, we're down to 24, so now the numbers have changed, right? 23 of 24 are gonna fail, right? I think you have to be able to get your team, to get your executives in the mindset to recognize that failure in the early stages of the maturity curve is really learning opportunities. In AI more so than anything else, like you can wait for the competitor to get pretty good at it and then try to copy it, but it's not like software. It's not something that you just take and stamp into your environment. The value is not transferable. It's something that you cultivate. It's not something that you buy. And so unfortunately, this is the time for the executive narrative to really think about experimentation and learning as an above-the-line exercise as opposed to below-the-line exercise.
I agree with that, but I think a little bit differently about it, right? So if you're in the business of AI, you have your company survives by your algorithms, and that's how you survive. Then you don't suffer from pilotitis, right? It's good because that's your business, right? When you work in other industries, I'll bring it back to, because I'm a physician, I work in healthcare, so that's my examples, but you could replicate this in any other business that you're in. But if you are in a drug company and I make a drug, I run a clinical trial for 7 years. If I fail and I saw a signal, I repeat that trial over again to get the product in the market. Because the way people work in companies is you're a director, they become VP, and then blah, 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 right? That's your career move and career progression. It's established. If you then start playing the little pilot here, and that's called innovative person, right? So every company has like innovation departments and like, oh, you're innovative lady or innovative guy. So now you walk around with innovation in your head, right? So when you sit in that department, what happens is you are an accessory, right? You're not part of the core business. So, and if you do something innovative, what happens is you get promoted to your next zone, right? And so the next person comes in, if they repeat the exact same thing you did, then they're not innovative. You get it? So there's no structure for long-term goals. So if anyone here works with any companies like that, what happens is you do a cool pilot, but then you do it like a press release and then it's done. Then the next project again, then a cool press release, then it's done. It never carries on. We never learn from it. So I think it's the way companies are structured. It's not structured to incentivize going beyond the pilot. Even when you have successful pilots, people don't even act on these pilots, right? So it gets frustrating to a certain point where one of the quickest ways to exit a company is to become a head of innovation because you're about to leave the company pretty soon, right? Because you get frustrated with all the pilots that was so great that died, but that's what it gets. So I think it comes with a different way of the corporate mind of the CEOs of companies who think completely different on how they look at innovation within the industry, right? It has to be part of the entire process as opposed to, it's a hobby or something I dabble in, which is what happened.
Yeah. I want to go back to this fact that the value is not transferable. It's very different from software. When most of us do pilots, I know this is not an English word, I use it a lot, cruciality, like the cruciality of a use case. How crucial is the use case? Most of us tend to start with simple use cases, right? And with an AI simple use case, it's cute, but it doesn't add value. And the fact that you can't transfer the value to a more complex use case is actually where the business value breaks down. I believe that when experimenting with artificial intelligence, you have to find use cases that are in the second category of what I'm describing. There are things that you know, there are things that you don't know, and there are things that you don't know that you don't know. Who is it that said that? It was Donald Rumsfeld? Yeah. Rumsfeld, right? So the
known knowns.
Right. The three knows, right? We have two political references on stage for the morning. This is going well. A lot of people build algorithms that tell humans things that they already know already. But it tells you it in a moment of time. It tells you when you actually need it, right? Or it tells you where you might have suspected it differently. And those are not things that can scale up into the next category, which are the things that I don't know, right? I like to experiment with things that you don't know. What can the AI tell you that you should have known, but you don't know? And in CRM, CRM is a really simple example, right? So at one point in my career, I rolled out an ambient intelligence, right, that would tell the sales rep what to do. And so our business partners really wanted, like a dozen recommendation types, right? We can't go out with one recommendation type. We can't launch the product with just one algorithm. We have to launch it with at least a dozen algorithms. So we made up a dozen crap, right? It could tell you that, that doctor is married or not, right? Which the rep knows, right? Or it could tell you that the client, went to this school or not, which the rep knows. And what we found after tons of studies is that the user of the CRM system, and most of us, humans, if we're all from the same species here, really only want to be told about 3 things new in a day. Really. It's like sitting around with a smart A, right? If they're telling you more than 3 things in a day, the human mind only has the capacity to take 3 recommendations per day. After that, you start to feel stupid. It actually deteriorates your self-esteem, right? So we had all these algorithms. We could tell you this and that and the other, and annoyed the reps like crazy. And we finally ratcheted it down to one algorithm. We relaunched the whole thing, and it was one algorithm. And the only thing this algorithm told you is if this doctor had actually prescribed your competitor's drug in the last 30 days. That's the only thing it told you. Because that's the thing that you don't know, okay? And that is what got people comfortable with this ambient AI. And I was like, hey, what else can you tell me, right? This is kind of cool. Like, I trust you now. What else can you tell me? So I think as we get into this institutionalization of AI at industrial scale, we have to recognize again that you can't start with the use cases that don't have cruciality. It has to have some sort of cruciality to it. And by all means, don't put your most crucial business processes on an artificial intelligence as yet. But don't do the simple things either. It's just cute. It doesn't really add value.
Well, I think another problem also is we talk about AI as a central point of it, right? So the previous talk, if you look at Rebecca Minkoff's idea, if you look, it's about the individual experience, right? That's what it comes down to. It's about personalizing that experience to someone, right? So it's about taking data and how do you personalize it. So I'm leaving here and I'm heading to Abu Dhabi, for example, and you have Etihad Airline Group, and we had a chat about this yesterday. Their interest is when someone travels across different time zones as a business traveler, you get in certain places, you're jet lagged, sometimes you take sleeping pills. But the idea is, can we predict, let's say we know you have a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning and you are leaving from New York to Abu Dhabi and you're going through different time zones, can we recommend the best time for you to sleep and for you to wake up and what is the best experience for your meeting, right? So that's a project. that we're working on. So it's a completely different kind of industry, right? But interested in this kind of concepts. It's AI, but as a customer, do you care it's AI or not? No one cares about if it's AI or not. The idea is, do you deliver the right experience? That's what it comes down to. But what happens is, when people get very educated a lot of times, so you start discussing, everyone wants to become an expert in AI. Like, I sucked at math in school, right? So I mean, I still don't like numbers, right? But I like the concept of what I get out of the data sets, or does it personalize experience for me? I think that's where it goes down to. So if you start, like Richie said earlier, about what is the problem you're trying to solve? If the problem is I want people to feel healthier in meetings, it makes sense. So you go in the back end. The customer would not care what the algorithms are and what the algorithms say. So I think it's all about that personalization. Today, talking about the known knowns or the known unknowns, right? But today, people are paying tons and tons of money to companies like 23andMe, right? To find out that your eye colors are blue or green or brown. You look in the mirror, you could say it. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Right? We pay money to know things that we already know.
Turns out I'm South Indian.
No, correct, right?
So $299 to...
No, correct. And I do the same thing too. So I had my whole genome sequenced about 2 months ago, and to find out about myself. Well, first was to tease it, because my family is from Cameroon, like Central Africa, right? So, I mean, I was born in France, I grew up in France, but I knew exactly where my family is from. I was first generation in France, and if I walk around my grandparents' neighborhood, I could see people that look just like me walking around the street, right? So I was curious if you would say, hey, I had some Scottish in me or Irish in me or something like that, but that was not the case, right? So he told me I was from Central Africa, and I had some parts of Congo and parts of East Africa. So I'm like, great, but I already knew that. But I paid for that, right? We're all doing this. We're all paying for this, to know things that we already know. And so then the question becomes, what if we tell you something that you don't know, and we don't know the solution to it? Oh, no, we can't tell you, right? I mean, so if you say, oh, you have a risk for Alzheimer's, I don't want to know that. I want to know what I already know, which is the reality of it, right? And so the new industry becomes one in which, so imagine a sequence, for example, I knew where I was from, and then it tells me my risk for disease. My grandmother had heart failure and hypertension. So he told me I have a gene that puts me at high risk for hypertension. So good information. So I could change my lifestyle things, right? Which is why the Apple Watch and the Fitbits play a role in it. And it comes down to the point of making data actionable, right? This is all AI in the background, but as a consumer, you don't care if it's AI that does it. You know that you do your step counts, you know that it gives you alerts. That's what happens in the back end. That's one piece of it. He also told me that I have a special gene that I'm able to smell asparagus in urine. Very useful gene. Right?
That you didn't know, though.
That I didn't know, right? Yeah. But that's a useless known. I don't know what to do with that particular gene. But what happens is this opens up a very new era of medicine, right? So to me, we come from this point of having that baseline where I think life is like a whole story and the gene is just the beginning. So we do these tests, for example, these companies, I think there's a huge business model coming forward. If you see GSK, for example, put in over $200 million in 23andMe, there's a reason why, right? If you see Roche buying Flatiron, there's a reason why. Because you want to get that baseline piece, right? And then now it becomes, if you know you're at risk for having Alzheimer's, if you know if you have risk for having dementia or hypertension, what do I do? Do I watch what I eat, right? Do I do more step counts to change that path over time? Or do I just wait until I get Alzheimer's? There are things we can do proactively. And that's what AI is going to do in healthcare, is make us change us from being reactive about healthcare to become more proactive. We're all engaged with it, right? So we not sit till we get sick and then take drugs, as opposed to let's engage in health every single day.
Okay, well, let's talk about the dark side, though, of AI a little bit, right?
There's no dark side.
There's always a dark side. So Richie and I, we've had a conversation a couple of times about when the algorithm can tell you something about yourself before you're ready to hear it. And, the general community, when you say AI, they think iRobot, right? Yep. Like, we're nowhere near sentient AI. I don't think, and please differ with me if you think I'm wrong, but there is sort of, this scary thing. We go after these hair on fire use cases, like how do we identify a patient for a clinical trial? And we know things about people that sort of border on the creep factor. So let's talk about algorithm bias. Let's talk about stealing people's data and who really owns it. Let's talk about the machines being able to tell us things about ourselves we're not ready to hear.
Yeah, so I think to have a sober conversation of this, you have to remove robotics with machine learning and NLP and computer vision, right? It's a subset of artificial intelligence, and if you could just take that whole branch of a tree and cut it out and leave it alone, you can have a fairly sober conversation around it. There's a very delicate bridge that we have to cross over, which is we have to be careful that as we do mass personalization at scale, we don't cross over into mass manipulation at scale. I think it's a very delicate bridge, and it's probably one of the first time that as a species we actually have the real possibility that this could happen. In my work with Humanity.co, we're working with organizations to make sure that they have intentional consent from consumers around sensitive data sets, not just informed consent, but intentional consent. And the market dynamics or the market context is that you can actually compete on this stuff now. This is so top of mind for consumers, for governments, for the media, and the press, that trust is becoming the super differentiator. It's no longer experience and engagement, it's trust and transparency, right? So around 2000, we went from price and quality to experience and engagement, and now we're going to trust and transparency. So I think we have to be careful there. And that's an issue of intentionality. There are many companies that are micro-manipulating individuals who didn't do it intentionally. And when they figure out that they're doing it, they stop. And they didn't design it that way. I think a clear litmus test that you're crossing the line is when you're doing it intentionally, right? If you're intentionally engaging in micromanipulation, I think that's where a challenge is. I'll give you an example. I'm actually working with a very popular social media platform that's not Facebook, who they have an algorithm that after looking at your activities for about 30 days on the platform, the algorithm can predict where you might be on the gender spectrum, regardless of whether you believe you're there or not. And the challenge that they have now is they have marketing content that's segmented to different parts of the gender spectrum. And so, of course, their marketeers are like, we got to target Manny with this content because he's reflecting. Now, this, by the way, gender is very sensitive. You might not know where you are on the gender spectrum, or you might believe something contrasts to the algorithm, or whatever the case may be. And so I'm being asked as a human data ethicist to help guide them on how they would participate and navigate this process. And so I walked into the first meeting and I said, why did you write the effing algorithm in the first place? Like, I don't understand. Like, in what world, what were you guys drinking or smoking when you decided that this was a great algorithm to write? I just don't understand. How like, I can't help you. It's like calling the fireman, it's like calling the fire alarm guy to put a fire alarm in your house after it's been burnt, right? So I think it's the intentionality that we have to be very careful about. And it's a very delicate bridge. It's because you don't want to stifle your business, and you don't want to hurt your competitiveness by not being too taking on too much risk. But as a species, I think ethics are, capitalism itself is changing. It's being less Milton Friedman and more Bill Gates and more Warren Buffett-esque. And I think ethics are probably going to be the differentiator in the future. That'll be my last remarks.
All right, so we're at our time. So let me just give you each 30 seconds to leave our audience with one very useful, pragmatic tip. What can they do differently, et cetera, in order to take AI forward in their organization? And let's do it from a point of inspiration. Manny? Richie?
I think you have to come to terms with the fact that we've always had artificial intelligence. I used to have a Casio watch in high school that had a calculator on it. I don't know if you guys remember those. It was the watches that had a little calculator. That was, for some reason, I had the one from Casio. That was an intelligence. I think what we're losing the fact that there is there's expected machine intelligence, right? Like 40 years ago, if when you had a calculator, like I remember the first refrigerator, I saw a calculator on. I'm like, this is cool. I don't know what I would ever do with it. What would I calculate, right? Today, we're sort of in this space where the voice stuff, the NLP stuff, the vision stuff is sort of interesting. 20 years from now, Siri is just going to be like a calculator, right? If you don't have voice-enabled capabilities 20 years from now, it's like not having a calculator 40 years ago. So we've always had artificial intelligence. It's just getting more and more intelligent. And I think as long as you can come to terms with the fact that all you're doing is that you are progressing the species forward, I think it's a good place to be.
Great, thank you. Manny?
For me, I would just encourage everyone to get their genome sequenced, and let's start a movement of being proactive in healthcare. I think it's a fun and exciting world. Like I did mine, for example, But I think just sequencing myself and tracking my own activities does absolutely nothing if it's just me. So I think when we have everyone engaged in that movement, for the very first time, we'll stop calling people patients. We'll all become like universal in this whole movement of being proactive in healthcare. And for the very first time in the history of humanity, we'll be able to understand from a longitudinal perspective what actually causes disease and be able to predict how to prevent it. And if we do that, then we could live longer and healthier lives. And we hope to be back here in 100 years to chat about this again.
All right, let's give a hand for our panelists. Thank you, gentlemen.